Hi, I'm Gill, I'm Riley's mum. So the first time I noticed anything was wrong, I actually thought he was diabetic because he was really thirsty and I knew that that was a sign of diabetes. But he was getting up during the night and not sleeping through, and I hadn't had that experience with him since he was a baby. And he was always an amazing sleeper. I happened to mention to our doctor, saw her on the school run, and I said to her, Riley's really drinking a lot. It doesn't seem right. And she said, like, how much? So we spoke about how much, and I was saying, you know, he's literally gasping. He's putting his head under the tap in the middle of the night, but then obviously he's getting up and needs a wee constantly. She went, bring him in on Monday. It was Friday. So I said to her, do you think it's diabetes or something with his kidneys? Because my dad has polycystic kidneys and I know it's hereditary. And she said, could be. Just bring him in on Monday. I think we need to do an urgent blood test just to check. And then we literally within 48 hours had a referral to the local hospital. He just got checked over by a paediatrician. And I kept saying to him about the polycystic kidneys, and he kind of kept dodging round it. And I said, you know, why? And he said, let's do a brain scan. And I said, why are you doing a brain scan if we think it's something to do with his kidney? And he said, just to be on the safe side, because it could be something to do with his pituitary gland. So I said, okay. So we went for the scan, and then within 48 hours, we got that call to say, there's an oncologist waiting for you at Addenbrooke's. You need to go now. Well, at that point, I still didn't have a proper diagnosis. It was very much a fear of the unknown at that point. All we knew was it was an oncologist. I rang my mum and told my mum, and was obviously crying. I was at work. In that time, I was thinking, I don't want to tell his dad what it is, because one of us needed to be in an okay state to drive all the way to Addenbrooke's. So I just told him we had an urgent call, but didn't tell him about the oncologist. And this did make me laugh afterwards. About a week later, when we knew everything, I'd said to him, I knew we were seeing an oncologist, but I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to worry whilst we were driving. And he went, I wouldn't have known what it was anyway. So he drove us up there, but I did speak to a couple of my friends on the way and spoke to my mum because I was really nervous. But at that point, obviously I had Riley in the car with me, so I was trying to be not nervous and be okay. And when we arrived, there was literally a queue of 8 specialists all waiting to see us. And we didn't know we were staying overnight. They just told me I needed to go. So when I went in and they started putting a name band on him, I said, why are you doing that? And she said, well, all the children have it when they come for a sleepover. And Riley said, are we coming for a sleepover? And I went, are we coming for a sleepover? And she said, yeah. And I said, how long for? And she said, oh, we don't know yet. I didn't know what to think because nobody was really telling us anything at that point. It was more that there was something wrong, but they didn't know what. And we had to measure how much he was drinking before they could start to medicate him. And they were more concerned about that than they were about his actual tumour. So they didn't actually tell us about his tumour for 48 hours because they needed to get his drinking under control because he was at risk of drowning himself. When we first got the diagnosis, it was actually with a different doctor to the doctors that had been looking after us. So it was already a bit weird and uncomfortable because we hadn't built a rapport with him. And he said he just wanted to take us into a different room and talk to us. He told us that he had a brain tumour and that it was resting on his pituitary fossa and on his optic nerve, and that he was at risk of going blind, as well as many other things coming from his pituitary gland. Because of where it's placed at the rear of his pituitary gland, they couldn't remove it. And because it was sitting on his optic nerve, they couldn't biopsy it. So they had to do every test possible without going into his brain to actually touch it, because if they touched it, they thought he'd go blind. He had to have a lumbar puncture done, so he had to go under a general anaesthetic to have that done. I can't even tell you how many times they took blood out of him and he screamed the whole entire building down. And eventually they came back and said they were 95% sure that it was benign. It would be watch and wait, and it still is watch and wait. We couldn't have a treatment plan because it was just watch and wait. So I had to get my head around something that was always going to be there potentially, that would potentially always be a threat to his life. Still to this day, I don't always deal with it very well. Some days it does make me really sad and worried, and I just want him to grow up and have a normal life. And to a degree he does have the most amazing, wonderful life, but there's still that little part of him that doesn't, that we still always have that fear of what if it changes. Since his diagnosis, I think I've had to learn to live with it and be brave and to cope with everything that life throws at me around it. He's really brave himself, and he's really positive, and he's such a joy to be around that actually it makes it easier to deal with everything on a day-to-day basis. He's old enough now to tell me when he's worried, if he's got any concerns, if something's changed. But before, obviously, he was only just 8 when he was diagnosed. Then it was more of a case of us watching what was going on and keeping an eye on him and seeing how he was doing. And he has just been amazing, and I think he's the one that's made me cope with it. I've had to find an inner strength, don't get me wrong, and I think I did fall apart a lot to start off with. When he first came home, when we left the safety net of the hospital where I knew he was going to be okay, and then we were at home, and then I did fall apart. I did go for a walk one night and phoned my best friend, and she had to drive and find me because I was sitting on the floor crying, thinking what's going to happen, because I didn't know if he was going to survive at that point. But I think as a parent, I do think you find an inner strength because it's your baby and you've got to be strong for them. So I am. So the arrival of Angela for me, I remember that first phone call from Angela at Tom's Trust. I was in my dining room and she phoned, and I'd been asking if there was somebody that I could talk to, if there was somebody that could help us. And actually the hospital had been really quite closed off to start off with and not that helpful. And then all of a sudden this phone call came, and this amazing lady on the other end of the phone said, "I'm Angela, I work for Tom's Trust. I'm a clinical psychologist. I want to help you." And I think I just burst into tears immediately that somebody was actually going to help me and listen to me, but ultimately help Riley, because he needed to understand. And as much as I'm always really honest with him, I will always tell him the truth. And sometimes I might scoot over a little bit when he was younger and I needed to not say things in so much detail. But generally, I've always been a big believer in, I do it in his language, but try and tell him exactly what's happening. So she helped me with that language and how to manage him when we were at home. But she also gave me that moment where I could leave him to talk to her so that he could tell her things that maybe he didn't want to say to me. I'm his mum, you know, whether he was embarrassed to tell me, whether he didn't want to worry me, whatever it was that he wanted, he knew he had a safe space to talk about with her. I do truly believe that we wouldn't have done this as well as we have without her. We just wouldn't. And she's like part of our family now. She always gives us both a chance to talk. So Riley will go out of the room and she'll talk to me, and I'll talk to her about the things and behaviours that I've seen, that I've recognised, or patterns or things that are different, or issues that he's having at school or anything like that. So she's forewarned with what to try and angle her conversation to him about. Riley's diagnosis has impacted me in so many ways. I think I'm probably a little bit overprotective of him, and he'll probably be the first person to agree with that. I try really hard not to be. I feel like I probably do mollycoddle him a little bit to try and go to work, to try and send him to school, to try and do all the housework and keep all of that going, and deal with the appointments, the phone calls, the MRIs that he hated, that filled him with so much stress, filled me with so much anxiety before we went. it was, and obviously then waiting for the result and knowing that I was probably going to have to wait a week before somebody called me and went, "You're okay, don't panic, nothing's changed." Yeah, it was really hard to learn to manage that. And I still wobble about it sometimes. You know, when he goes for an MRI now, I still think, what if it's changed? What if it's gone back to how it was? What if they're going to tell me it's grown and now they've got to take it out? You know, it's always that what if never goes because they couldn't remove it. It's always there. I did go and have some private counselling of my own, in my own space and in my own time, as well as speaking to Angela and having my time with her. But obviously my time with her was mainly about Riley, not so much about how I was feeling. We did talk about it, but not as much as I did when I went and had it myself. And that really helped me. I needed that. But I also did need the distraction of work. I love my job. Being a wedding coordinator is my life. Like, I absolutely love it. So actually getting stuck back into work was really good for me, and made me get on and carry on. And actually there was one couple who decided that they weren't going to do favours for all their guests at their wedding. I'd actually had a meeting booked the day that we got taken into hospital with them. So I'd had to phone them and say, "I'm really sorry, my son's been taken into hospital, I can't come." I kept in touch with them of what was going on because of it was that day. And they did a fundraising thing for him on the day and raised £500 for charity on the day of their wedding. Because everybody knew when I got there, all their guests knew what was going on, and they were passing around collection buckets to everybody. It was amazing. There has been some wonderful things come out of it, some amazing friendships, people I've met along the way who have children that are going through similar experiences. So that's, you know, to talk to somebody else who understands, I think is the best piece of advice I could give to anybody, because for me that was one of the biggest helps, was just finding somebody else who understood what it was like for your child to be diagnosed with a brain tumour. People should support Tom's Trust because the impact that they have on our life and so many other children. I've got to know other children that are looked after by Thomas Trust now as well, and other mums as well, that obviously the children's parents, and we all agree Angela is our life. She is the one we know we can turn to when anything changes, anything happens. We know we can go to Angela, and I don't think we would cope as well at all without her. I'm so glad that Debs did what she did and used her story to make something so wonderful. Things I think that would really have helped, that Tom's Trust could potentially get involved in, is that I would love to have gone to a support group and met other mums in a social environment rather than at the hospital, because the only time I really got to talk to other mums to start off with was when I was at the hospital, until I found the groups on social media. But then I never met those people in person. It was only talking to them on social media. So actually to be able to meet someone and have a cup of coffee and have that social environment that you can compare notes, if you like, and talk about your experience, I think would have been really, really good for me. So the one thing for Riley that I think would have been good is to be able to go to a social group with children of a similar age. The only opportunity he had seemed to be more focused at either terminally ill children or younger children. There didn't seem to be anything for his age group, especially now there's nothing for him to go to where he'd be able to speak to somebody and go, what's wrong with you then? But I do think that he would have benefited from that. So when I think about Thomas Trust, I think about Debs and how amazing she is and how much she's done for everybody else from a life-changing experience that she's gone through. And then I think about Angela, and all I can say is thank you.